I never thought the man I loved could do something so horrifying. I was once blinded by romance, hoping that all the red flags I'd seen were just fleeting mistakes or misunderstandings. But everything changed the day I discovered he sold my cherished car behind my back without warning, without remorse, to fund his own lavish getaway. In that moment, my world shattered. I was lost, betrayed, furious. Yet from the ashes of my heartbreak, I found a spark of determination that propelled me forward. It was time for me to fight back, to unravel his secrets, and take my ultimate revenge. My name is Juliana Morgan, though most people just call me Julia. Growing up in a sleepy Midwestern town, I lived a quiet, unassuming life. I preferred to see the good in others. I think that optimism was baked into my soul by my late grandmother, who always insisted on giving people second chances. Hope is a powerful ingredient, darling, she used to say, but don't let it keep you from seeing the truth. Her words echoed through my mind the day I met Daniel. We crossed paths on a bustling street in Chicago, where I'd moved to chase my dreams of becoming a journalist. He was tall, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way I found irresistible. Our initial conversation was brief, just enough time for him to ask if I was lost. I was, and for me to flash him. My naive grin, grateful for any help in a new city. He showed me to the cafe I was looking for. Over a quick coffee, he told me about his life, an aspiring entrepreneur who'd launched a modest startup. He seemed kind, attentive, genuinely interested in me. He asked questions about my goals, my background, the tiny details of my Midwest hometown, and I, so eager for connection in a big city, was entranced. I gave him my phone number at the end of that first meeting. Our dates turned into a relationship before I even realized it. Daniel was quick to paint our future in vivid colors. He had big dreams, his own software company, a condo overlooking the Chicago skyline, and a life filled with travel. His ambition mirrored my own drive to succeed as a journalist. I was magnetized by his confidence, his unstoppable energy. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Yet if I look back now, I see the small warning signs, the way he'd insist on controlling which restaurant we'd go to, or how he seemed to keep track of how much time I spent on personal projects that didn't involve him. He never outright forbade me from doing what I wanted, but he'd slip in remarks that gnawed at my self-worth. Are you sure you want to write for that blog? They aren't very credible. Or, should you really go out with your girlfriends again? Didn't you just do that last week? In those days, I shrugged it off as simple concern. I told myself that he cared enough to keep me on the right path. Deep down, though, something uneasy stirred, but I buried it under the layers of excitement that came from feeling cherished, from seeing that someone as ambitious as Daniel wanted me by his side. Little did I know that this was just the start of something far darker. Before moving to Chicago, I inherited my mother's old car. It wasn't glamorous and aged Honda that had seen better days, but it was mine. More than that, it was a symbol of my freedom, my independence, something I'd cared for meticulously since I turned 16. Every time I sat behind that wheel, I felt my mother's presence, as if she was still guiding me. Even in the city, though I often relied on public transport, I refused to let go of that car. The engine purred with the echoes of my childhood memories, late-night drives with Mum, the smell of coffee in the cup holders, the sense of pure, unfiltered belonging. Daniel, ironically, didn't even own a car. He reasoned that he had no use for it in Chicago. Whenever I spoke of my Honda, how important it was to me, he would dismissively wave his hand. It's a hunk of metal, Julia. Why do you keep paying to park it and maintain it when you barely drive it? His logic was straightforward, but it lacked empathy. That car was more than just a means of transportation. It was a piece of my history. And yet, I let his quiet criticism slide. Time and time again, I told myself that he simply didn't get it, because he hadn't experienced my relationship with my mother. Over the next year, small cracks in our romance continued to expand. Daniel's business demands grew. He became more stressed, more irritable. Our once spontaneous love transformed into a pattern of me tiptoeing around his moods. On good days, he would shower me with affection, buying me thoughtful gifts, bracelets, fancy dinners, small tokens that made my heart flutter. On bad days, his anger would flare at the slightest inconvenience, making me feel worthless, as though everything that went wrong was my fault. Despite the roller coaster, I stuck by him, convinced that this was what real adult relationships looked like. All couples have their ups and downs, I told myself. My grandmother's cautionary words about not letting hope blind me drifted to the corners of my memory. I assured myself I was strong enough to ride out the storms. After all, I'd uprooted myself to chase my dreams. I could handle heartbreaks and disagreements. But the day he sold my car without telling me, the day he obliterated my trust in the blink of an eye, was the day I finally woke up. I can still feel the tremor in my fingertips as I recount the morning I found my car missing. It was a chill autumn day. I stepped out of our shared apartment building, balancing a stack of papers for an early assignment at the local news station. I gazed at the parking spot I typically rented. It was empty. My heart thudded. Instantly, I thought it might have been towed. A rush of panic coursed through me. My entire body buzzed with confusion and dread. I scrambled to call the towing company, certain some dreadful mix-up had occurred. They had no record of my car. Next, I called the city's parking enforcement. Nothing. Over an hour of frantic calls and no leads. No sign that my vehicle had been taken by any official service. With no immediate explanation, I called the police to report a stolen car. The police arrived, took some notes, asked me questions. "Do you have any suspects in mind?" they asked. I was stunned by the possibility that someone might want to target me. But the only people I could think of were my handful of neighbours with whom I occasionally exchanged polite greetings, or my co-workers who had never shown any animosity. As I stood there, perplexed and helpless, Daniel breezed down the sidewalk. "Hey," he said casually, eyeing the police cruiser with mild curiosity. "What's going on?" I hurried to him, voice trembling, explained the situation. I'll never forget the odd flicker in his eyes, a momentary flash of guilt swallowed up by a veneer of calm. "That's terrible," he said, feigning shock. "I can't believe someone stole your car." The officer asked him a few routine questions, and Daniel answered smoothly, as if reading from a script. I was relieved to have him by my side, thinking he was supportive, unwavering. But within moments, I saw how carefully he chose his words, how he avoided meeting my gaze for too long. I brushed it off. My mind was too consumed by the fact my car was gone. For days, the police had no leads. My anxiety doubled as I tried to keep up with my busy job schedule. I roamed the neighborhoods at night, searching side streets. I plastered photos of my Honda on community forums online, but it was as though my car had vanished into thin air. The heartbreak was raw, open. That car was my last tangible piece of my mother, a keepsake of our bond. Then came Daniel's announcement. He was leaving for a business retreat. He insisted the trip was crucial to the future of his company. I tried not to be bitter, my world was crumbling, but apparently he had to go chase a business opportunity. He left me with a quick kiss on the forehead and a promise. "When I'm back, I'll help you figure this out." Hang in there. From the moment he left, something gnawed at me. Though I missed him, I also felt the hush of suspicion. His reaction to the stolen car had been too neat, too detached. My intuition hissed that something was off. So, one night I dug through our shared finances, yes, the part I never meddled in because it was Daniel's territory. That was the first time I saw the withdrawal, a lump sum in his personal account that matched almost exactly the estimated value of my car. My heart lurched, and my pulse pounded in my ears. My mind reeled with possibilities. He had no reason to have that specific amount of money unless he sold the car. But how? Without my paperwork, without me ever knowing. Deep in denial, I tried to find alternative explanations. None came. So I pressed further, rummaging through the desk in our home office, where Daniel kept important documents. And there it was, a receipt from a local used car dealership. The make, model, and VIN matched my beloved Honda. My blood ran cold. There was a small note scrawled on a sticky note in Daniel's handwriting. A name and a phone number, someone who'd apparently purchased my car. My stomach churned with a noxious blend of dread and fury. In that moment, I knew for certain the man I had given my heart to had secretly sold my cherished car. He'd done it just before leaving, for his so-called business trip. It all made sense now. My car wasn't stolen by a stranger. It was stolen by the man who claimed to love me. I was paralyzed for what felt like an eternity, sitting at the desk with the damning evidence in my shaking hands. How could Daniel do this to me? My eyes scanned the piece of paper again and again, hoping it would magically change. But it didn't. Reality was merciless. The betrayal cut deep, reverberating like an earthquake through all the memories of our relationship, the small gestures of kindness, the early morning coffees, the stolen kisses on the rooftop under the stars. Every intimate moment suddenly felt contaminated by his deception. I questioned every aspect of my life with him. Was anything real? Or was he simply using me for convenience, a stepping stone to fund his grand ambitions? Sinking onto the couch, I tried to steady my breathing. The anger grew, scorching through my veins. I was furious at him, but I was also furious at myself. How could I be so blind, so quick to trust? The police had been searching for a criminal, and all along, that criminal lay in my bed. The heartbreak coursed through me like molten lava. I felt small, vulnerable, humiliated. But beneath the heartbreak, a tiny ember of rage lit in the pit of my stomach. A surprising clarity washed over me. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. For too long, I'd silenced my intuition. This time, I'd see things through to the end. I would find a way to reclaim what was mine and make him regret every ounce of betrayal he'd inflicted on me. Within hours of my discovery, I contacted a lawyer friend, Darcy, who worked at the local legal clinic. I spilled the entire story, my voice shaking. "Daniel sold my car without telling me," I said, tears choking my throat. "What do I do?" Darcy's shock echoed my own. She walked me through some legal possibilities. That this was a form of fraud, potentially theft, depending on how he'd acquired my signatures, if he had forged them, or if I had signed something without realizing the contents. She told me to gather all evidence and keep it safe. "Don't confront him yet," she warned. "If he's manipulative enough to do this behind your back, you need to be strategic. Don't tip him off." Her words ignited a spark of direction. My heartbreak slowly mutated into determination. I didn't want to be the victim anymore. I wanted justice. I wanted to face Daniel, not with a trembling lip, but with the unshakable might of the truth. Over the next week, I busied myself collecting documentation, the dated receipt from the dealership, the suspicious bank transactions, my own proof of ownership. Every piece came together like fragments of a horrifying puzzle. Each day felt like an eternity. Thoughts of betrayal haunted me, making it impossible to sleep more than a couple of hours at a time. I carried those ghostly shadows into work, half dazed, half furious. Meanwhile, Daniel posted on social media about his business retreat, which looked suspiciously like a lavish tropical vacation. Photos of him on a beach, wearing sunglasses, his grin wide, drinks in hand. No mention of business colleagues or conferences, just him, living it up with a few of his old college buddies I recognized from earlier gatherings. The nerve of it. My chest ached with raw fury. The man who claimed to be working tirelessly for his startup was, in fact, partying in paradise. He had financed it with money stolen from me. My heartbreak turned sharper. I was determined that the moment he stepped back into Chicago, he would face me and the consequences of what he'd done. At night, while my eyes were too heavy to focus, I recounted every questionable moment in our relationship. I remembered that time I caught him rummaging through my purse for reasons he dismissed as looking for gum, or the times he suggested I open a joint bank account with him so he could help me manage my finances. Memories that seemed innocuous, before now reeked of carefully planned manipulation. I also began to recall the moments I stifled my own voice to appease him. My desire to avoid fights, to keep him happy, had slowly eroded my self-confidence. My mother would have been appalled. She raised me to be independent, to stand tall. How did I end up cowering in the corner of my own home, letting him make decisions for me? Instead of spiraling further into self-blame, I clung to the realization that I wasn't powerless. The truth was on my side, and I had allies like Darcy who believed in me. That gave me courage. I was determined that once Daniel landed back in Chicago, he wouldn't know what hit him. 2 weeks after my discovery, Daniel came home. He arrived in the early evening, stepping off the elevator into our apartment with a golden tan and a relaxed smile that made me seethe. He carried a small suitcase and a bag of souvenirs. I stood in the living room, arms crossed. "Hey, babe, I'm back," he announced, all smiles, as if he expected me to run into his arms. When I didn't move, his face faltered. "What's wrong?" he asked, placing the bags on the floor. My heart pounded. Part of me wanted to tear into him verbally, to let the torrent of accusations fly. But Darcy's caution played in my mind. I needed to keep calm, gather further evidence, lure him into telling me the truth, or at least incriminate himself. So I forced a shaky, brittle smile. "Nothing," I lied. "Just tired." He stepped forward cautiously, pulling me into a half embrace. I stiffened but didn't fully resist. The smell of his suntan lotion reached my nose. I wondered if he'd even bothered thinking of me at all during his indulgent escape. "Did you miss me?" he asked, his voice gentle. My anger flared, but I choked it down. "We need to talk," I managed. "Let's sit." He hesitated. Fear sparked in his eyes. He must have sensed the shift in my demeanor. We settled on the couch, me perched at the far edge, arms folded. I asked him about his retreat, prompting him to share details. He tried to spin a tale of intense business workshops, but his story was riddled with holes. I could hear the lies in every sentence. My patience wore thin. Then I decided to drop the bomb. "I found who stole my car," I said, voice trembling slightly. His expression froze. For a split second, I could see the panic. "What? Who?" "You," I nearly spat, pulling out the copy of the receipt and the transaction slip. "You sold it at a used car dealership, Daniel. And you forged my signature or did something equally underhanded. You took the money. I can't believe this." His mouth fell open, eyes wide as if cornered. For a heartbeat, he seemed like he might deny it. But the evidence was undeniable. His next move surprised me. Rather than falling to his knees begging for forgiveness, he scoffed and tried to flip the script. "Julia, calm down," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "You barely used that old Honda. It was just collecting dust. I sold it for us so I could invest in my company, so we'd have a better future." My anger rose like a fiery tide. "You used that money to go on vacation," I shouted, my control finally snapping. "Don't pretend this was for me. You posted pictures, Daniel. Or did you forget I can see your social media?" He blanched. "All right, yes. I needed a break. You needed a break. From what? From lying? From cheating me out of something that mattered more to me than you could ever understand?" His face twisted defensively. "It's just a car, Julia. You're overreacting. I'll pay you back once the business takes off." "A car with memories of my mother," I hissed, tears stinging my eyes. "You know how much she meant to me. And you sold it without my permission. Forged paperwork, do you realize how illegal that is?" "You're being dramatic," he grumbled. "I had every intention of replacing it. I knew you'd never willingly give it up, so I took matters into my own hands." My hands shook. I couldn't believe the callousness spewing from his mouth. Any remorse he should have shown was replaced by frustration at my reaction. The man I thought I loved was a monster of manipulation, and he couldn't even feign regret convincingly. "Get out," I said coldly, standing up. I felt raw. Part of me wanted to strangle him with rage. Another part wanted to break down sobbing. "Leave my apartment. I'm done." He scoffed again, a sneer curling on his lips. "Your apartment? I've been paying half the rent for months, Julia. You don't get to just throw me out." I trembled with fury. "I can, and I will. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." Something like fear flickered across his features. He grabbed his suitcase, stood up, and marched toward the door. Before exiting, he glanced back at me, his gaze simmering with anger. "You're going to regret this. Remember, you're nobody without me." Those last words hung in the air like poison. It took every ounce of willpower not to crumble right there. Instead, I kept my posture stiff, my jaw set, refusing to let him see how badly he'd wounded me. When the door slammed shut, a trembling sob ripped from my throat. I slid to the floor, tears streaming, my heart shattered into 1,000 shards. But within that pain, I tasted something else. The fierce longing for justice. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed the confrontation, the nerve of him claiming I'd regret it, the venom in his tone when he told me I was nothing without him. Rage and heartbreak twisted inside me like a barbed coil. I wanted to strike back, to let him feel the humiliation he'd inflicted. And slowly, a plan began to crystallize. First, I took Darcy's advice and filed an official police report, presenting all the evidence I had. The officer in charge was sympathetic. Daniel was in clear violation of the law, and there was enough evidence to suggest foul play. Though the wheels of justice might move slowly, the fact that the police were aware of the situation gave me a sense of relief. Then, with Darcy's help, I found the name of the individual who ultimately purchased my car. He was a dealer who had apparently resold it to another buyer. My heart twisted at the possibility that I might never get it back, but I resolved to try. If nothing else, I wanted to confront the new owner, to see if they'd be willing to let me buy it back, or at least glean more information about Daniel's deception. The next step was confronting Daniel in a more public forum. Exposing him, Darcy had suggested, might discourage him from trying to harm me or defend himself through more manipulative means. A big part of me balked at the idea. Putting my personal dirty laundry in the spotlight felt terrifying. But then I remembered the dismissive way he brushed aside my feelings, how he threatened that I'd regret pushing him away. Maybe it was time for me to take the story I'd always wanted to write, the one about betrayal, cunning, and heartbreak, and turn it into an expose that would strip away Daniel's carefully curated facade. As a junior reporter at the local station, I knew the power of storytelling. I also knew that I had to tread carefully. Blowing up Daniel's reputation might spark backlash. He might threaten me further, or worse. But Darcy insisted that having everything out in the open could actually shield me from his manipulations. If he dared to lash out, I would have a public record of everything. My plan began to take form. 1. Collaborate with the station's investigative segment to highlight unscrupulous schemes and frauds. 2. Create a compelling story around the notion of forged signatures and stolen property. Ensure one had all legal ducks in a row, no naming him directly until I was certain I had airtight proof, and the station's lawyers go ahead. At the heart of it, I wanted the world to see Daniel for who he truly was: a fraud, a manipulator, a man who would sell someone's prized possession and memory for a quick buck. I needed closure, but I also wanted to protect anyone else who might fall victim to his charm in the future. Word spread among our mutual acquaintances. Some were quick to judge him, calling him an opportunistic jerk. Others insisted I must have misunderstood or that I was overreacting. One friend even tried to set up a mediation, urging me to work it out. But I was past the point of making nice. Daniel had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Then came a phone call that rocked me. It was from an unknown number. I hesitated, my stomach clenching, as I answered. "Hello?" I ventured. "Julia?" said the voice on the other end, uncertain. "This is Anita. I'm Daniel's ex-fiancé." I nearly dropped my phone. Ex-fiancé? Daniel had never mentioned an engagement in his past, but as Anita's story unfolded, I began to see a pattern. She explained how she, too, had fallen under Daniel's spell. He'd proposed within a year of dating, but as their wedding approached, Daniel's true colours emerged: controlling behaviour, manipulative tactics, financial schemes that drained her bank account. By the time she realised it, she'd lost thousands. Forced to pick up the pieces after calling off the wedding. "I only found your number because I saw some of the posts and mutual connections," Anita explained, her voice trembling. "I recognised the pattern, and I just had to reach out to let you know you're not alone. I'm so sorry for what he did to you." My cheeks burned. Anger, gratitude, a swirl of emotions battered me all at once. This man had a history. He was a serial manipulator, preying on vulnerable women. The realization fueled my determination. At least now I wasn't alone. Anita and I talked for hours, exchanging stories, details of his cunning approach. She offered to provide a written statement about how he'd conned her. That could only strengthen my case. By the end of our conversation, I felt a renewed sense of validation and an upsurge of wrath. Daniel's betrayal went beyond me, and it was time the world knew. Although I was relatively new at the station, I had enough standing to pitch a story idea about fraudulent practices involving personal property. My supervisor, Harriet, a hardened journalist with decades of experience, took an immediate interest when she glimpsed my research. "This is solid," she remarked, scanning the documents. "You're sure it's safe for us to run it?" I nodded, heart pounding. "I have legal counsel," I said, referencing Darcy. "I have a witness. And I'm the victim. This is a real story that needs telling." Harriet pursed her lips, gave me a small, supportive nod. We'll have to frame it carefully. No direct naming until the authorities confirm the details. But I can't deny that it's compelling. Let's do this. It felt surreal finally using my journalism to shine a light on injustice that had struck me personally. Over the next weeks, I poured my energy into gathering on-camera interviews, documentation, additional statements, and evidence about how frequently this type of scam could occur. The station's lawyers reviewed every sentence, ensuring it was bulletproof from a legal standpoint. As we edged closer to the air date, I felt the tension coil tighter within me. Daniel had been harassing me through texts, leaving voicemails full of anger and blaming me for ruining his life. He also threatened that if I dared to air the piece, he'd make sure to drag me down with him. The intimidation attempts rattled my nerves, but with each threat, I grew bolder in my resolve. AITA agreed to appear in a blurred-face interview, recounting her experiences, describing how Daniel convinced her to invest in his failing ventures, how he claimed she was worthless without him, how she eventually discovered he'd stolen her jewelry to pawn for cash. My stomach twisted, hearing the similarities to my story. I admired her bravery for speaking out. Yet, even with the looming confrontation, I felt more alive than ever. This was my chance to reclaim my voice, to show Daniel and the entire city that I was no victim. I was a fighter. The day before the broadcast, I received a tip from Harriet. Daniel was trying to sabotage the segment. He'd apparently called the station, threatened legal action, and insisted the story was defamatory. Thankfully, Harriet and the legal team stood firm. They told him politely that if he believed the story was untrue, he should come on air and state his case. But his only response was more threats. That evening, as I left the station, I saw Daniel waiting by my car, the rental I was using after losing my Honda. Fear prickled in my stomach, but I squared my shoulders and approached with caution. "What do you want?" I asked, voice cold. He looked disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. "We need to talk," he said sharply. "Nothing to talk about," I snapped back. "Unless you're here to apologize and come clean, in which case you can talk to the police or my lawyer." He laughed bitterly. "You think you're so righteous? You and your big TV story? It won't end the way you think." My pulse hammered, but I forced myself to stay calm. "We'll let the truth speak for itself," I said, turning to unlock my car door. He grabbed my wrist. The gesture was rough, jarring. Fear darted through me, but I yanked away. "Don't you dare put your hands on me," I hissed, eyes blazing. Anger flashed in his gaze. Then he softened, as if realizing intimidation alone wouldn't work. His face twisted into a pathetic attempt at regret. "Julia, look, I was desperate," he said, lowering his tone. "The company was struggling. I just wanted a break, a chance to reset, so I could work harder. I didn't mean to hurt you. We can work this out if you pull the story. Let's fix this. I still love you." His words might have moved me once upon a time. Not anymore. I saw the desperation, the manipulation, the emotional blackmail. "No, Daniel," I replied, voice trembling with heartbreak and rage. "You don't get to say that after what you did. You never once apologized for selling my car, for disrespecting my mother's memory. You only care about yourself." He didn't bother to deny it, but I noticed a flicker of hatred in his eyes. He realized that I truly was done, that his hold on me had broken. I got in my car, slammed the door, and sped away, leaving him standing in the dark. I cried the entire drive home, my tears fueled by a painful mixture of sorrow and relief. The finality of our relationship weighed on me, but so did the knowledge that tomorrow, our story would go public. And in that exposure, I hoped to find the justice I deserved. The next evening, the station was electric with anticipation. Our investigative segment was set to run in prime time, with me as the lead reporter. The show opened with a teaser. In our exclusive report, we expose a pattern of deception and fraud that left unsuspecting victims without their most cherished possessions. My heart thundered as I watched from backstage, waiting for my cue. Then it began. The pre-recorded interviews rolled, the blurred face of AITA, voice trembling as she described her experiences with Daniel. We aired documents showing the fraudulent sales, the forged signatures, an image from the used car dealership that matched the receipt I found. I felt a swirl of anxiety and empowerment, seeing the evidence displayed on screen for the world to see. After the segment, The anchor turned to me for a live Q&A. My mouth was dry, but I maintained composure as I explained the bigger picture, how con artists exploit emotional trust, how this was a growing problem, and how we could protect ourselves and others. Though I didn't name Daniel explicitly on camera, the details were unmistakable to those who knew him. We ended with a call for potential victims or witnesses to come forward. When the camera lights faded, I exhaled a shaky breath. Harriet gave me a proud smile. The staff applauded softly. They understood the weight of going public. Within minutes, social media buzzed with reactions. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Messages of support poured in from viewers, from friends, from acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. But the highlight came the next morning. The station's tip line had multiple messages from individuals, some who recognized Daniel's description, and had their own stories of being swindled or manipulated by him under different aliases. The police, now armed with more evidence, swiftly broadened their investigation. It was terrifying, exhilarating. In one swift move, I'd pulled Daniel's carefully constructed mask from his face, and it was glorious to see him squirm. 2 days later, my phone rang again, a number I recognized as the police precinct. Officer Ramirez, the detective on my case, had news. "We located your car," she said. My heart soared. "The current owner is willing to talk to you about a potential buyback." Seems he had no idea of the fraudulent circumstances when he purchased it. I was elated. Even if it was expensive, just the possibility of reuniting with my beloved Honda was more than I'd dreamed of. Immediately, I set an appointment to meet the current owner at a small suburban lot that weekend. On that crisp Saturday morning, I arrived, heart pounding. The man was waiting next to the Honda. Seeing it again, my eyes welled with tears. It looked a little different, some new seat covers, a fresh layer of polish, but it was unmistakably my car. I explained, tearfully, how it had been stolen from me. He nodded sympathetically, showing me all the paperwork that indicated he'd purchased it in good faith. We struck a deal. I'd pay him what he had spent on it, plus a little extra for the trouble. It cost me a chunk of savings, but I didn't care. It was worth every penny. As soon as he handed me the keys, I hugged the steering wheel, tears streaming down my cheeks. My mother's memory lived here, a piece of my heart restored. Yet, as I turned to leave, I spotted a figure lurking at the edge of the lot, Daniel. My pulse spiked. Officer Ramirez, who had accompanied me to ensure everything went smoothly, immediately noticed him as well. She stepped closer. Daniel approached, his expression unreadable. I felt cold dread swirling inside me, but also a simmering defiance. "Julia," he said, voice tense. "This is getting out of hand. You're blowing up my life over a stupid car. We can settle this ourselves. No need to drag the police and your station into this." My anger flared anew. "You have some nerve showing up here. If you have anything to say it to Officer Ramirez." He shot her a glare, then turned back to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You'll regret this. Mark my words, Julia." In that moment, everything slowed. The distant hum of traffic, the crisp rustling of leaves, the pounding of my heart. I realized that Daniel might never truly apologize or learn his lesson, but that no longer mattered, because I had set in motion the wheels of justice, and I wasn't alone. I looked him dead in the eyes. "No," I whispered firmly. "I won't. Not anymore." Officer Ramirez stepped in, calling out to Daniel, "Sir, we have some questions for you regarding recent allegations." She reached for his arm. For a moment, he looked like he might bolt. Instead, he let her place him under investigative detention, reading him his rights. My chest felt tight with a mix of relief and sorrow. I watched as the man I once loved was taken in for questioning. I felt heartbreak, but also triumph. This is what it takes sometimes, I thought, to stand up for yourself, even if it means destroying the illusions you once held dear. The next few weeks passed in a blur of statements, paperwork, and cautious hope. The police investigation into Daniel's fraud case kicked into high gear once I provided the mountains of evidence I had compiled. Even though I'd walked into the station feeling like a lone warrior on a battlefield, I quickly realized I wasn't fighting alone. Darcy, my steadfast lawyer friend, showed up at every meeting and encouraged me not to shrink under pressure. Each time I had to recount Daniel's schemes, how he had forged paperwork to sell my Honda, and used the money for his secret getaway. My hands trembled, but my voice held firm. I was still angry, still hurt, yet somewhere in that anger and pain, I found the courage to keep talking. Meanwhile, my expos at the television station resonated more deeply than I ever anticipated. Calls poured in from viewers who had experienced similar deceptions, sometimes in real estate deals, other times in business partnerships. Many of them weren't prepared to step forward on camera just yet, but they wanted someone to hear their stories. I felt my heart ache for them. In a world where trust can be so easily fractured, so many people had been navigating heartbreak and financial ruin in silence. Perhaps that was the most unexpected gift Daniel's betrayal had given me, a chance to channel my heartbreak into empathy for others who had also been wronged. One humid Tuesday afternoon, Darcy accompanied me back to the police precinct for an update on the case. Officer Ramirez, who had taken the lead after the day Daniel appeared at the suburban car lot, ushered us into a cramped office. The walls were lined with filing cabinets and old case files. It smelled of paper and stale coffee. She rifled through a folder, then turned to me with a small, encouraging smile. "We've tracked down the chain of transactions on your Honda," she explained, tapping a page in front of her. "It aligns with everything you've told us." The used car dealer who bought it from Daniel said the sale raised red flags, but he didn't push the issue at the time. Now that we're deep into the investigation, he's fully cooperating. It's looking favorable for prosecution. A wave of relief washed over me. There was something deeply validating about having official confirmation that I hadn't blown this situation out of proportion and that Daniel's actions were indisputably criminal, not just morally reprehensible. "You said you found others who bought from Daniel or invested in his startup," Darcy prompted, leaning forward in her chair. Officer Ramirez nodded. "Yes, we're collecting statements from several people. Their stories vary, but each one reveals he used similar tactics, forging signatures, falsifying documents, or making grand promises to secure funding. This isn't an isolated incident, it's a pattern." I felt a hollowness open up in my chest. Hearing how many people Daniel had deceived made me furious all over again, but it also strengthened my resolve to keep pushing forward. If I hadn't exposed him, who knew how many more people would have fallen into his trap? Back at home, the barrage of thoughts and emotions intensified as I tried to resume something resembling a normal life. Each evening, after a long day at the station or meeting with Darcy, I would sink into bed, fighting off nightmares where Daniel laughed at me, brandishing the keys to my stolen car. Other times, I'd dream of my mother, her face kind and reassuring, as she urged me to stand up for myself. When I'd jolt awake, disoriented and drenched in sweat, I'd remind myself that reality was on my side. Step by step, I was reclaiming the life Daniel had tried to tear apart. An enormous shift occurred a few weeks after Daniel had been taken in for questioning at the car lot. The man who'd purchased my Honda called to confirm that the buyback process was complete. On his end, the paperwork was finalized, and the car was officially mine again. In that moment, it felt like a massive knot in my chest began to loosen. Ownership legal, tangible ownership was back in my hands. I could almost feel my mother's presence in the room with me as I hung up the phone. It wasn't just about a vehicle. It was about securing a crucial piece of my heritage and dignity. The following weekend, Darcy and I drove out to pick up the Honda. As soon as I saw it, I felt tears prick my eyes. Although it had some minor changes, a new set of tires, a slightly different stereo system, everything else was familiar. My fingers trailed along the driver's side door, remembering how many times I'd gripped that handle during my teenage years, how my mother and I would belt out 80s ballads with the windows rolled down. For a few seconds, I couldn't help but close my eyes, letting old memories wash over me like a gentle tide. Darcy touched my shoulder gently. "You okay?" she asked softly, her voice filled with understanding. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah, just a lot of memories." She gave me a small smile. "Good ones, I hope." "They are," I said. And they were despite everything Daniel had done. He couldn't erase those recollections. This car was part of me, part of my past. Now it was part of my future too. The entire experience only renewed my conviction that no one should be able to rip away what's rightfully yours. especially not through deceit and betrayal. During that ride home, as I slid into the driver's seat of my Honda and turned the key in the ignition, a profound sense of triumph fluttered in my chest. Hearing the engine's purr felt like a victory anthem. The city streets glided past, the sunlight dancing on the windshield. For the first time in weeks, I no longer felt like I was suffocating under Daniel's lies. I breathed deeply, letting the fresh air and the hum of the car remind me of my own strength. It was a quiet, private celebration, but one that felt monumental. News of the car's return spread among the people who had been supporting me. Colleagues congratulated me at the station. Harriet, my supervisor, even joked about wanting me to do a follow-up on air, showcasing how I'd managed to retrieve my beloved vehicle. In truth, the story didn't end simply with me getting my car back. I wanted to highlight the resilience and legal recourse available to victims of fraud. Even though the heartbreak still lingered, I knew shining a light on these issues could help others avert similar fates. Harriet's suggestion became more than a half joke. We started to outline a potential segment that would feature not only my story, but also interviews with professionals about spotting warning signs of financial abuse. All the while, Daniel remained a looming spectre. He had been released pending trial, but with the mounting evidence against him, his freedom was limited to strict conditions set by the court. Every so often, I'd receive a harassing text or a missed call from an unknown number that I suspected was him, and it sent jolts of anxiety through me. Darcy and Officer Ramirez reminded me not to engage, so I dutifully forwarded every message to the authorities and blocked the number. Yet despite these lingering shadows, I felt something shift inside me. I was no longer the trusting woman who would give a manipulator the benefit of the doubt. I was also no longer the woman who believed she had to handle every challenge alone. My circle of support, Harriet, Darcy, Officer Ramirez, and AITA, proved that when people stand together, deception and cruelty have less room to thrive. In quiet moments, I'd reflect on the emotional toll of everything that had transpired. The shock of betrayal, the ache of losing my mother's car, the fear of Daniel's retaliation. But alongside that deep scar, I recognized the seeds of a new kind of determination and strength within myself. In reclaiming my car, I hadn't merely recovered a physical possession. I had reclaimed a part of my identity, a piece of my past, and the confidence to confront whatever came next. Indeed, reclaiming my Honda was not the end of my battle against Daniel, but it was a critical turning point, the catalyst that reminded me I was capable of fighting back and winning. Driving down the roads of my city again, I felt my mother's presence in every mile, her loving reassurance woven into the hum of the engine. And as the soft afternoon light drenched the skyline, I realized that no matter how dark Daniel's manipulations had been, I had finally found my way into the sun again. Several months later, the legal proceedings against Daniel culminated in a trial. I testified, palms sweating, voice steady, outlining exactly how he'd sold my car and forged my signature. AITA testified about her missing funds. The used car dealer testified about the questionable transaction. One by one, the pieces fell into place. Daniel, no longer able to hide behind his charm, looked smaller, paler than I'd ever seen him. In the end, the jury found him guilty of fraud. While the sentence was not as severe as I might have hoped, limited jail time plus restitution, it was enough to ensure he wouldn't easily con another woman again. For me, that was closure. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunlight, breathing a sigh of relief. In the following months, I moved to a new apartment. I kept my Honda, of course, parking it in a safer, private space. And I continued to climb in my career, focusing on stories that exposed injustices, especially those that preyed on vulnerable individuals. My personal ordeal shaped my mission as a journalist, fueling a passion for uncovering corruption, for giving a voice to those silenced by manipulation. Through it all, I learned that heartbreak can be a crucible, forging us into stronger, more compassionate versions of ourselves, if we let it. I had been naive, too trusting, too quick to see only the good, but now I was wiser. I could still hope for the best in people, while no longer ignoring the truth when it stared me in the face. I also learned the power of forging genuine connections. I found new friends, supportive co-workers, and at the time of finishing this story, I have even begun to open my heart to someone new someone who respects my independence and values honesty above all. I'm taking it slow, refusing to sacrifice my own boundaries or identity ever again. Looking back, I sometimes wonder, did Daniel ever truly care for me? Or was I just another pawn? In the end, I may never know, but what I do know is that I claimed victory over the darkest chapter of my life. He didn't expect my payback, my ultimate act of courage. Yet I delivered it in the most decisive way possible, by refusing to let his betrayal define me, by telling the truth, and by reclaiming my power. I made sure, in the end, that the only person left stunned and alone was him. And for me, well, life is an open road once again. Thank you for journeying with me through the darkest twists and turns of betrayal, heartbreak, and redemption. My story proves that even when everything seems lost, when the person you trusted most wounds you beyond measure, you can still rise, stronger than ever. In reclaiming my beloved car, exposing the truth on live television, and ultimately finding closure, I discovered the boundless strength hidden within me. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own power in the face of adversity, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with friends who might need a reminder that justice can prevail, and subscribing to my channel. Every click helps spread the message that hope and courage can triumph, no matter the odds. Together, let's shine a light on hidden injustices and keep forging our paths toward a brighter tomorrow.